Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to this healthy Ramadan presentation today. I'd like to welcome Dr. Salman Waqar, who's a local GP and representative from the British Islamic Medical Association. Alhamdulillah, he has joined us this evening. He's going to be presenting on a healthy Ramadan. I'm going to hand over and allow Dr. Salman to get going. If there are any questions for anybody who's listening, please pop them into the comment section. Inshallah, we'll try and answer them. But I'll hand over to Dr. Salman Waqar.
Jazakallah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Dr. Adnan, thank you for that kind introduction, and for Karima for inviting me today to talk about a healthy Ramadan. So as Dr. Adnan said, I am a local GP. I'm the president, of the British Islamic Medical Association, and also have a little bit of an academic role as well at Imperial College London. And Ramadan is actually one of my academic clinical interests. Alhamdulillah, for the last 4 or 5 years, I've been doing a bit of research around Ramadan, published about 15 papers or so. But this isn't really meant to be an academic talk. This is meant to be a general talk for the Muslim community in terms of how and why we should be thinking about a healthy Ramadan. And what we're going to talk about is that actually, so what is the reason, what is the potential for Ramadan to be linked to your health, and then we'll go into a bit more details around preparing to succeed, thinking healthily, eating healthily, moving healthily, and then finally talking about health conditions and Ramadan. It's really important that people know that this is meant to be a general educational presentation. It's not personalized medical advice. So if you are someone who has some of the conditions that I mentioned, please don't take this as the only thing in terms of speaking to a health professional. You do need individualized medical advice, and please do seek that out, especially if you have a new disease, so new diagnosis of diabetes or heart disease or something like that, or if you've had a change in your condition, you've been recently hospitalized, or you found that your condition has worsened. It is really important that you do actually speak to someone to make sure that you can fast safely. And these are my opinions; they're not the opinions of the organization. And please do be rest assured that there is no sponsorship, and this is purely for public benefit, inshallah. And if there are any questions, there is an email address there at the bottom which you can contact for any questions or concerns, again of a general nature or not of a specific not specific ones. And BIMA is the British Islamic Medical Association. We are a volunteer-led organization of Muslim healthcare professionals, not just doctors and nurses or medical students. We have over 6,000 of us all across the country, alhamdulillah, connected to our ulama, connected to our masajid, and connected to our NHS community as well, alhamdulillah. So to begin, Ramadan. Why think about Ramadan and health? And we know that Ramadan is such a beautiful time of the year. We look forward to it. The narrations of the companions, we know, they spend half the year hoping that the rewards that they gained during Ramadan were accepted, and the other half of the year preparing for it. And Ramadan, and fasting rather, nowadays has become quite trendy. If people follow health blogs and influencers, people will say intermittent fasting is good for you. The 5 to 2 diet, if people have heard of that, it's become quite trendy, and there are benefits of fasting. We know that, and in fact, why wouldn't there be? Why would there not be a benefit in something that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has commanded us to do for those who can? And I think it's important that when we're talking about health, we don't forget that perspective as Muslims. We're fasting in Ramadan because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala told us to, not because it's healthy, not because it's trendy. This is a command. This is an act of ibadah first and foremost. Any health benefits are secondary. They are there. You have to find them. You have to work for them, but they are secondary. But we also have to remember that you can't fast. You can't do these acts of ibadah unless you're healthy, as you'll know. If you've been to the masjid and you see someone, or you yourself perhaps may have mobility problems, you know that they can't go into sajda. They can't stand up long in qiyam. And they may feel that they're deprived of some of the blessings of being able to do sujood, or be able to stand for long periods of time. And similarly, people who aren't putting in the effort to look after their health may find that Ramadan is more difficult for them, or perhaps more difficult than it needs to be. And there's a famous saying of Imam Shafi, rahimahullah, who says that health is the crown that only the sick can see. And you'll know this if you've ever been ill and you've had periods where you're not ill, that when you are well, that you don't think about your health. It's only when you're unwell that you do that. So Ramadan is a really important time for us. We know that, alhamdulillah, and we try our best to prepare for it. But we need to try and think about how we can enter into Ramadan on day one with us being at the strongest possible foot forward. So we think so much in Ramadan about what we're eating, who we're eating with, when we're eating. We plan all that sort of stuff out. But it's not that difficult for us to think a little bit further, a little bit more laterally, and think about how can I make my health even better after Ramadan? How can I be even fitter, even healthier, even slimmer, even more resilient after Ramadan? So that's why thinking about health is important in Ramadan. And it's also sometimes to think about some of the goodness that Ramadan sort of brings out in us, how we can use that to overcome some of our vices. Statistics show that in some areas where we have large pockets of Muslims, up to 20% of our community smoke. And before you get into the fiqh of it, we know that smoking causes is linked to heart disease, links to cancer, it's linked to strokes as well. And of course, it's not just these obvious vices as well. A lot of us find it difficult to let go of other substances or foods that we enjoy. It's not just your things like illegal street drugs or alcohol. Sugar, we all love sugar, don't we? We all love, and we have a craving for sweet things. So sugar, salt, fat, all of these things are harmful in excess, and Islam teaches us moderation. And Ramadan is a perfect time for us to think again about how can we uphold the goodness. It's also important to bear in mind where we are as a community in Britain with all the different health inequalities that we experience. And the odds sometimes do feel stacked against us because we live in areas where there isn't that much investment in public services, or we may not actually be able to express our desires, or services aren't particularly well designed for us. In South Asian and Black Caribbean communities and African communities, you're sometimes up to 5 times more likely to be diagnosed with diabetes. And yet still, we find it difficult to make changes in our lifestyle. And again, Ramadan is a perfect time for us to be thinking about how can we take some of the barakah of Ramadan and stretch that out, not only during these 29, 30 days that we're blessed to witness, and may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make us be able to witness this year, but also going onwards into the future. And linked to this as well is that because we do have poor health, it's not surprising to know that many of us will be taking medicines in and around Ramadan for conditions like diabetes and heart disease and kidney disease and asthma and so on. And sometimes, and I'm sure Dr. Adnan has experienced this as well, is that some of us, as doctors, patients come to us and say that, Doctor, alhamdulillah, Ramadan is here. I don't need to take my medicines, right? It's the barakah of Ramadan. I don't need to take my insulin. I don't need to take my metformin. I don't need to take my heart blood pressure tablets and so on. And I think this is unfortunately a thing that gets us into a lot of trouble sometimes, because the world, Ramadan isn't a sort of get out of jail card for your conditions. You still have to take your medicine. You still have to do all those things before. If anything, you need to be better prepared if you have got these conditions as you head into Ramadan. So it's something that people who do take medicines need to be even more cautious about, or even more prepared for, as they enter into Ramadan. So as I said, Ramadan is an act of ibadah. Any health benefits are secondary, but what are these health benefits? Ramadan, studies have shown, science has shown, that if you fast in Ramadan and you do so appropriately, that is, you don't binge eat, you're not feasting as well as fasting, you can lose weight, you can lower your cholesterol, lower your blood pressure, lower your blood sugar. You can have a stronger immune system. People find that the mental health can be boosted. Not everyone, but a lot of people do find that the mental health is a lot stronger in Ramadan. You can control unhealthy habits, as I mentioned, but gorging on chocolate and sugar and caffeine and these sorts of things. But not only that, it's economical. Alhamdulillah, for a lot of us, we're not having to spend money on lunch, and we're eating smaller portion sizes as well. So actually, Ramadan can be economically beneficial as well. But remember, our first and primary focus is ibadah. That is what Ramadan is about. So as we talked about, Ramadan is very important to us. Being in good health is a key enabler for us to get the benefits of Ramadan. And bear in mind, Ramadan is, it's not a one-day thing. It's not a 2-week thing. It's a whole month. And therefore, people will often say it's a marathon and not a sprint. But it's a marathon that does have a sprint in at the end. We know that because in the last 10 days, we are frantically searching for Laylatul Qadr. And so you want to, you need to be thinking about these things, and you'd want to start Ramadan on day one where you're not going to have a headache because you haven't drunk caffeine or because you've not had your, 10 Snicker bars that you eat that day. I say this as someone who eats a lot of Snicker bars, by the way. You want to not have the fast day being a difficult day for you when you're fasting. And not only that, you want to enter the last 10 days, and particularly the last, few odd nights with the best possible conditions, so you are able to stand during the night if you're able to, and seek the pleasures of Laylatul Qadr, inshallah. And so to do that, planning is so important. There's a famous saying that planning is half of success. If you fail to plan, you plan to fail. So if you're thinking about any event, whether you're a student studying for exams, whether you are someone who has got a major surgery coming up, or whether you're a family about to take a big holiday, you spend ages, we all spend ages planning, thinking about things, about what could happen, what couldn't happen, going shopping, speaking to people, making plans and itineraries and so on, changing money at the bank and so on. Why do we not spend that same attention when it comes to Ramadan? It's 30 days. It's a long holiday. And it's 30 days to gain an immeasurable amount of ajr. 83 years worth of worship can be accumulated in one night. And it would behoove us to really think long and hard about how can we make sure that we go into that month and go into those last 10 days and into those last odd nights with a plan in place. We may not be able to live up to it, but at least there's a plan for us to try and get there. And inshallah, if we don't make it to the stars, perhaps we can at least make it to the moon. So just some things to think about this year in Ramadan in particular. Firstly, you're a year older, mashallah, than last year. Not only are you wiser, are you more experienced, but as people age, their body changes as well. Life circumstances change as well. You may have had children or grandchildren. You may have had a change in your job situation. Think about these things, about, what's going to be different this year, particularly for new parents. A lot of new parents struggle, especially when the children are mobile and a little bit more demanding in their first Ramadan, because they're not able to spend their time in ibadah as much as they used to in the past. So just be prepared for that. And if you know that's going to happen, you can try and mitigate for it. But not only that, you're not as disappointed if it's not possible. And inshallah ta'ala, Allah will overlook will reward you for your effort, even if you weren't able to get the outcomes that you wanted. Another thing to bear in mind practically is that this year the clocks will go back or forward. I can't remember which way it is. And exactly. So if you're not familiar with that, if you're not prepared for that, if you're not aware of that, you don't want that to catch you unaware. So look at the Ramadan timetables, look at that and plan for that as well. And depending on if you're staying in Wickham or whether you're elsewhere in the country, the fast will be somewhere between 14 to 16 hours in duration. So it's not as long as it used to be in the summer, but it's still not as short as we used to have it in the winter. We also have the Easter break in the middle. So again, if you have got children in school, or if you have got colleagues that are taking time for off leave, that will again adapt and change things. So just be prepared for that. It's going to affect your routine as well in terms of school, work, studies, and so on. So again, anticipate and prepare for that. Inshallah, we hope the weather will become warmer, though it doesn't look like it at this moment in time, but a lot can change in a month. And it will also get wetter as well. And so that will also change. And all the unplanned things that will happen in your life, they will also happen. Just looked it up. Spring is the clocks move forward. Jazakallah for that reminder. So all these things, planning is so important for preparation. And sometimes, as health professionals, we can sometimes unfortunately present ourselves in a way that we frame Ramadan through the lens of it being a problem, like, oh, you've got a health condition, or you've got to think about this, that, and the other. But, we have to be positive. As Muslims, we have to be positive and remember that this is the month of gaining taqwa. And so we need to sort of set some goals, and just here are some sort of, 3, otherworldly goals and 3 worldly goals for people to think about, and you can come up with your own. But really think about being positive. This is a month of opportunity. Every action, good deeds, is multiplied by a factor. And there is so much good that we can get from it, and also the bad things that we stop doing, there is so much more good that we can derive from that. So for example, if you do smoke, or you do chew pan, or do shisha and so on, really try and exert yourself this Ramadan to say that, look, I'm going to try cutting down on smoking, or stop smoking altogether. If you don't do much physical activity, say, listen, this Ramadan I'm going to park my car further from the masjid, or I'm going to walk to the masjid if I can. Or if you're a sister, praying at home, for example, you're going to do some exercises, as it were. Just build that into your routine. And similarly, weigh yourself before Ramadan and say, look, by the time Eid comes, I'm going to make sure that I've tried to lose some weight, or at least changed my diet a little bit. And we're going to talk through some of the things about what you can do to try and make that happen. So again, planning is half of success, and a failure to plan is a plan to fail. So now, inshallah ta'ala, we have made a plan. Let's turn our thoughts to what and where to prepare for. And so firstly, it's about thinking healthy. We've already talked about being positive. And, just to reiterate, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows your condition. He knows your affairs. He knows you may be a single parent. It's impossible for you to attend Taraweeh, for example. He knows that you have all these things that are going on in your life. He knows that. Don't forget that. And that is a really important part of being positive and thinking healthy, and having good thoughts of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, having good thoughts of the month of Ramadan. Being in the best mental space as you enter Ramadan is perhaps the best blessing that you can give yourself before any of the physical activities, so that you're in the right mindset, so that when Ramadan comes, every single thing that you do, inshallah ta'ala, is made easier for you, as long as you have the right mindset. So it sounds trivial, it sounds obvious, but really do take that step before the first fast begins, before you have your first sehri, that you are in the right headspace for Ramadan. You're making the intention that this is going to be, inshallah, your best Ramadan so far. And so these are the 4 things that I think you need to be thinking about for your preparation for your Ramadan, as it pertains to being a healthy Ramadan. So first is to think about your life routine. So, we all have a routine that we do. We all have things that we need to get out of the way. And some of these are mundane. Some of them, we can't do in advance, but many of those things you can do, or some of those things you can look to make your life easier. So for example, things like any life admin, any bills and those sorts of things that you have. If you don't have the things set up to do them, you don't want to be spending a Ramadan flicking through papers, trying to pay bills and so on. The other thing that's going to happen, of course, is, the tax year comes to an end in April. So people who are doing their businesses and accounts and so on, you don't want to be spending the first week or so of Ramadan just sort of thinking about where have you moved money there, here and other. Just get that out of the way now. So get that out of the way so that as you enter Ramadan, the first fast begins, you're not thinking about those 2 things. You're thinking primarily about, making and maximizing your ibadah in this month. Your meal plans as well, we always think about food and what we're going to eat, who we're going to eat with and so on. So try and make some meal plans from now. Think about what you're going to cook or what you're going to order in perhaps, and how they're going to be healthy, for example. Your zakat, for example, if it's complicated for you and it takes you a long time to calculate it, just do it now. So you're not calculating it, if you do pay your zakat in Ramadan. Eid gifts, for example, as well, just make your wish list now. You may not need to buy it if you can't buy it right now, but make your wish list now so you know what it's going to be. So you're not spending the last day of Ramadan just sort of frantically on Amazon trying to find gifts for your friends and family. Your dua list as well, that you make. It's a good habit to have a dua list that you frequently refer to. Make that now, so that you can refer to it frequently in Ramadan. A lot of people tend to, and myself included, we tend to sort of bring that out in the last 10 days as we sort of remember that. But if you can do that earlier, it's better, inshallah. Other things as well, just anything that's going on in your life, try what you can to prepare for it. Nowadays with your charity, it's a lot easier to automate your charity. You may find that's something that you dislike doing, but nowadays you can automate using various different platforms to every day in Ramadan just regularly give something to any charity of your choice, or to set up some charities to do that with. So key areas to prepare are here. So we talked about the routine. The other thing is about Sha'ban. We have 8 days, I think, left until Ramadan begins. We are still in Sha'ban. It was a sunnah of Prophet ﷺ to spend more time in this month fasting than he would outside of Ramadan. And there's great wisdom in that, and not just from a Danish perspective. I'm talking about here purely as a physician from a sort of acclimatization perspective. It takes a while for your body to kick into the metabolism that a fasting person has after doing it for a number of days. If you can do that earlier, again, it means that the first day of Ramadan, your body, your machinery is already used to eating and drinking and sleeping and functioning in the way that you would do in Ramadan. So purely from an acclimatization perspective, there is so much benefit in spending, just a couple of days ahead of Ramadan and do some trial fasts to see how it goes for you. And some people, again, if you have long-term conditions, you may find that this is a good time also to sort of see what your body can do. And because it's not Ramadan, if you break your fast, it's a nafil fast, so it has a different sort of category. But what you can do is, instead of fasting day one, you can say, look, I'm just going to have breakfast and not have anything else. I'm just going to have dinner. And you can have dinner later. It doesn't have to be Maghrib time. And so you sort of build your body up that way, and you sort of stretch those periods out. Or you say, I'm going to go 4 hours without eating something, then I'm going to eat something, then 4 hours. Or you can say, I'm only going to drink. I'm going to have my breakfast in the morning, and that can be a normal time for breakfast, but I'm just going to drink water. This is people who have difficulty, the first day of Ramadan, for example. And then slowly sort of cut out things so that you actually end up being, mimicking what Ramadan is. And the same goes for your sleep as well. So try and wake up on the earlier side of Fajr. Even if you just wake up, let Fajr come in, pray, and then go back to sleep. Not planning to fast that day because, you can't, or you don't feel like you're ready to in Sha'ban. Again, that helps with your sleep routine, helps with your sleep cycle. And we already talked about some of the things you need to think about in terms of your caring duties and work and studies and so on. But make sure your goals are realistic as you're doing that. And as I said earlier, your previous Ramadan experience is really, really critical in terms of understanding what this Ramadan is going to be. It'll be slightly easier this year because we're coming out of the summer months and we're in the spring months. But it will still be, as I said, there is going to be some degree of hardship, but there shouldn't, inshallah, be harm in that for you. So think about it and try and set some goals, as I mentioned, that are both this world and in the next world. And some Ramadan planners, if you Google, there's some really good resources that you can access to get you set up for that. This is a big one about fatigue, and a lot of people, myself included, especially those of us who are working in professions where there's shift work, or if there is safety critical tasks, in the manufacturing industry, rail industry, transport, and many other, areas of work where you really need to be on the top of your game. The fatigue is really difficult, and all studies have shown is the fatigue is not really linked to your eating and drinking. Your body actually stitches that reasonably well. It's mainly linked to your sleep patterns. So the best way to fight fatigue is to get into the best sleep cycle, the best sleep routine as possible. Now, I know for a lot of people, again, if you have got young children or caring commitments or you're working multiple jobs and so on, that's going to be difficult. But where and when you can, try and maximize your sleep. And remember, it's not the quantity of sleep, it is the quality of sleep. And make dua, and do not forget there is barakah in Ramadan, and there's barakah in seeking the blessings and the help of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that when you do sleep, that you're doing it with the intention to re-energize and replenish your health and your spirit so that you can carry out more ibadah. We kind of get caught up in all these things and forget this dimension to our health. But when you're fasting in Sha'ban or when you're fasting in Ramadan itself, you're finding the fatigue is overtaking you, it may sound paradoxical, and I'll come back to it later, but do think about exercise. And I'll come back to that later, but exercise can help with your fatigue. Meals, so like my Ramadan breakfast, by the way, is just 3 biscuits of Weetabix and some honey on top of it and some milk. Now, I get really tired of that, sort of 15 days into Ramadan, just eating the same sahur every day. So that can also contribute to some of the fatigue, and the same goes for your iftar as well. So try and have variety in your meals. If you can, have a midday power nap or a nap when you come back from home. And if you're not good at napping, this is the time to get good at it. Try it, see what works for you, find out what conditions are good. Turn the lights off, if that helps as well. But if you need to concentrate, switching the lights on, having the lights on your face helps, but also turning off any auditory sensations so you can get listening fatigue. So, it just put something in your ears, put some headphones on, not listening to anything, or just get away from an office which has a lot of hub. That can also create a lot of mental fatigue as well. Of course, prayer re-energizes the spirit, re-energizes the soul. Fresh wudu does that as well. So, if you are feeling tired, just go to the bathroom, bit of cold water, do your wudu again, and you may find that is all you needed to get yourself perked up again. And outside of the fast, make sure you're drinking plenty of water. And it's not in big doses, it's small amounts consistently whilst you are awake, inshallah. So that's some tips as what you can do to help with the fatigue. Again, there's just some things to think about your sleep. Ramadan doesn't help with consistency because the whole month changes in terms of when you're waking up. But it's about being not caught unaware by it. So the first day, it's not like, whoa, where did this come from? If you can, wake up a few days that we have got left now, so that your body's not that alarmed by that shift in your routine as well. And caffeine as well, in particular. A lot of us do love our chai, our tea, coffee, and so on. If you're not able to cut down in these 8 days, think about decaf. And decaf has to be brewed in a particular way, and you need to find a particular brand of it as well if you are particularly particular about what type of coffee or tea you drink. But there are some really good blends out there that you can use, and they can be just as effective in terms of getting your kick of a hot drink, but not by having the caffeine issue there as well. And the same thing also goes for sugar. And actually, sugar is probably more of an issue than people realize it. If you ever try and go cold turkey with sugar, you get very, very difficult issues with concentration, brain fog, headaches, and so on. We're so used to having sugar in our diets. And, we feel that in the first day of Ramadan as well. Try, again, your best to sort of cut that down gradually so that, the first day isn't difficult. And most importantly, during Ramadan, try not to at iftar just sort of guzzle down the chocolate and the Cadbury's and so on. Do maintain that discipline. And for a lot of households, if it's just not in the house, it just won't get eaten. And so try, empty the pantry or put it in the loft or the garage or somewhere where no one's going to touch it for the month of Ramadan. And as you come out of Ramadan, try not to sort of go back to those bad habits. And what you often find is that everything sweet tastes really sweet when you finish fasting, in Eid, for example. Just remember that and try not to sort of fall back into those bad habits as well. And really, they say that 30 days is all it takes to form a habit, and Ramadan is just short of that. In fact, if you add the 6 days of Shawwal afterwards, which have their own blessings, you have a reasonably good stretch of time. Again, also if you had Shawwal on top of that, where you can form a really, really, really good habit. And so, we talked about weight loss, we talked about reducing blood pressure, cholesterol, and so on and so forth. Do try and make this Ramadan have a goal in mind, at least, even if it's modest, to think about what you can do, because small changes will make a big difference over your life. Inshallah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us all a long and purposeful life. But a small change that we make now will make a big difference in our lives later. And as we can see from this graph here, if you make a small change in your blood pressure, for example, now, that's going to make a huge difference over the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years. And this chart here shows that if you're 1% better every day, you're much better place a year later than the opposite of that. If you're 1% worse, actually, you don't lose that much. So you only have one way to go, inshallah, in Ramadan, which is to try and improve yourself. And again, reiterating that point that Sha'ban is the time to put these into place. But if you can't do that, or if you listen to this when Ramadan has already begun, don't worry. Ramadan is a marathon. It's not a sprint. You have got time, inshallah, to make those changes and to gain the benefits. So we talked about thinking healthy. We talked about getting in a positive mindset. We talked about, using Ramadan to form healthy habits, inshallah. Now we're going to talk about the areas around eating. And I know a lot of people have questions or a lot of things to say about their diet. Now, the NHS has got this thing called the Eat Well plate. There's a bit of debate about this and how applicable it is. It's not really meant to be used, literally in the sense that you have to have it in this proportion. It's mainly trying to illustrate the fact that we possibly eat too much of the wrong thing. So, we eat too many carbohydrates, more is probably one of those things, and we don't have enough vegetables in our diet and fruits in our diet and enough fiber in our diet. Just some basic science for people if they are interested. So when you haven't been eating for about 8 hours, your body enters into what's called the fasting state. And this is really where your nutrients that can be absorbed from your gut, from sugar, which is the breakdown of the food that you eat, they've sort of been exhausted, and your body then starts looking for other sources of fuel. And that's when it starts breaking down things like fat and other things as well to make energy. And so really what you want to try and do is not have your body used to having too much raw sugar or simple sugar, which is what's found in like white breads and white pasta and these sorts of things. And we'll talk about that in just a moment. You want to try and get your body having less of those things. They're used to eating less of those things and having more familiarity or being set up, the machinery in your body being set up to have the more complex carbohydrates, or to have things like proteins and vegetables and fiber, which are more slowly releasing in their food. And therefore, they give you that sense of being full, and they give you the energy that you need to carry out your day. So just to go through a few of these things, so try again in this Ramadan to think about if you can reduce your salt intake. High salt intake is linked to higher blood pressure, a higher risk of having a heart attack or stroke, and also having more kidney stones. And the recommendation is to have 6 grams or less. And a lot of our processed food, the processing is actually due to the fact that there's salt in it. Salt's a very good preservative. So if you can, try and cut down on having processed food, particularly, if you like your sausages, your halal sausages and salami and these sorts of things, that's jam-packed with salt. So really do try and minimize that and cut down as much as possible. Other things to think about are low salt options. So if you do like Oriental food, or you use soy sauce, there's light soy sauce that you can use as well. And there are table salts that you can get that are low sodium in their diet as well. And sometimes people find that putting mushrooms or tomatoes can give you that salty, savory taste that you want as well. And again, it just goes back to the preparation in Sha'ban. If this is all news to you, you really don't want to be experimenting in Ramadan where you can't taste the food or you can't enjoy it. You want to be know what you're cooking and having tried it in Sha'ban ahead of Ramadan. Fat is another thing that, particularly in our diet, in Muslim, South Asian, Arab sort of culture, we do like putting our ghee and these sorts of things in our food. Too much fat is linked with weight gain, linked with a high risk of heart attack or stroke, and also, of course, body fat levels. There are good fats like olive oil and avocado and nuts, oils derived from nuts, which is great, but they, again, should be used in moderation. Some of the things that you can think about is air frying. So air frying is amazing. I don't know if any of you have ever tried it, but it can really cut down the amount of food that you have and bring out a different sense of flavor in the food as well. Try and get fresh meat if you can afford it instead of processed meat. And there are low-fat options now, pretty much everything that you can get. So that's another thing to consider. Sugar is a really big one. And a lot of us know that it's linked to diabetes, but it also shows that high sugar is linked with heart attacks and strokes as well. And most sugar isn't actually from the sort of, the white sugar that you put in your tea or in your desserts. It's actually also comes from carbohydrates. And carbohydrates are essentially, simple sugars that are found in, white bread and in most breads, but white bread has a lot of simple carbohydrates in it. And I showed you that plate. Really what you're looking for is about 1/4 to 1/3 of your meal being carbohydrates. But those carbohydrates that you have there, you really want them to be what we call lower glycemic index, or lower GI. So that's things like sweet potatoes, barley, oats, and so on. And you can look at the pack and see what the GI index is, or how much sugars are in there. When you are looking at things like what roti and naan and those sorts of things that you're having. So from today, really try and make this effort, try and see what it does, limiting your fizzy drinks, your chocolates, your white bread, your rice as well. That's another big thing as well in our society, in our communities as well. Try and limiting that and switching to other things as well. Meat, we all love our meat and our protein, but unfortunately, too much of it is linked with strokes, heart attacks, diabetes, and cancers. Again, looking back at that plate, we want to reduce our portion sizes again, a quarter to a third. Think about alternatives, particularly nowadays with a lot of vegan options that are there. It's quite easy to do this now. It is more expensive, of course, but inshallah in time that will become more affordable. And it was the Sunnah of Prophet to not eat that much meat, as we know, but find difficult to implement. And again, going back to that point around processed meat being worst, so burgers, hot dogs, sausages, these sorts of things, not really good for you in terms of the meat, let alone the salt that's in there. So there's some things for you to think about as well there. Now, with all these things that I mentioned, I know it's very difficult to do all of them. In fact, I'd be surprised if anyone can do all of it. The key thing here is to try and pick one or two things and make it achievable, make it realistic, not just for you, but also for your family. I know it's even difficult when you have your iftars and families get together and there's an expectation to cook in a certain way and so on and so forth. But do what you can, inshallah. And while we're talking about food and what we're putting in our mouth, let's not forget brushing your teeth. And I know there's a difference of opinion about whether or not teeth brushing and toothpaste breaks the fast, but you can brush your teeth between suhoor and iftar as well. So don't forget to do that if you follow the opinion that it does invalidate your fast. And don't also forget that if you do see a dentist or hygienist for routine things, the stuff that they do in your mouth will often invalidate your fast because it will go down your throat. These very high-speed machinery which uses water jets and so on. So do that outside the fasting hours if you can. And don't forget, of course, the sunnah of using a miswak as well. If you've never used a miswak, it can be a bit weird and a bit odd, the taste, and it takes a bit of time to get used to it. So again, pick it up before Ramadan in Sha'ban, so you're not sort of figuring it around like how does it work in Ramadan as well. Often what we do, again, after we've had our suhoor, is that, we have our suhoor and we quickly pray our fajr and boom, back in bed. It's really important that if you are going to brush your teeth and so on, you leave at least about half an hour so that the acidity that's in your mouth from having drunk or eaten, that doesn't wear down the enamel, the protective layer on your teeth. So try and leave half an hour after eating and brushing your teeth. So we talked about healthy eating. Let's just briefly talk about moving healthily. Now, there is, as I said, it feels paradoxical, but if studies have shown that if you take someone who is a hunter-gatherer, say they're from a primitive society, and they hunt and gather for a living, they run in the forests and the fields and so on, they're really physically active. You look at their metabolism, and you look at the metabolism of someone who just sits at home and is on the computer and so on and so forth. Their energy out, as in the amount of energy that the body uses, is actually relatively similar. And the reason for that is exercise doesn't use that many calories in comparison to our normal daily living. So if you look at the average calorie intake, it's about 2,000 calories, for example. Most of that is for what we call our basal metabolic rate, which is the basic functions that you and I need to be alive. That is to breathe, that is to blink, that is for our cells to reproduce, that is for us to do all these things, our heart to beat and so on. The majority of our body's energy, the metabolism, actually comes from that. And you'll know this actually if you've ever been on a treadmill and so on. You run for an hour and you think, oh my God, I've only burnt off like 30 calories or 300 calories. How is that possible? That's only like 6 or 7 biscuits. How is that possible? And again, that just highlights the fact that, what we put out is relatively stable. And of course, the more you move, the more you will need to, exert in energy. But the reason I made that point is that we often think that if I make any type of movement, I am using or losing energy that I can't afford to lose. And that's really not the case. And some of the exercises that you can do really aren't that intensive. And some of the key things, particularly those who are very inactive and those who are more elderly, need to be bearing in mind are things like strengthening activities that strengthen the major muscle groups like the legs, the back, the abdomen, and so on. And you don't really need to do anything like jumping on a treadmill and so on for these things. Actually, all you need to do is some simple balancing exercises. Modern days people do things like yoga and so on, but actually it doesn't have to be yoga and all the sort of, you know, philosophical stuff that goes with it. It's just simple strengthening exercises, just balancing yourself on one foot, or just bending forward ever so slightly. There's lots of things that you can look at. So if you just Google, you know, low intensity strengthening activities or strengthening exercises, you get loads of things that you can do, that people of all ages and all abilities can do. You can even do them sitting on a chair, for example. You don't need to sort of get up and do much for it. But it's really, really, really vital for people to do that, and they don't decondition themselves in Ramadan. And the reason I mentioned elderly people as well is that if elderly people become deconditioned, it becomes harder for them to sort of get their physical activity back. So it is something that we should really try and do more of. And again, this invigorates you. It releases endorphins, happy hormones, that sort of give you that sense of energy as well. So if you are an athlete, for example, there are some guidelines that you can look at. And I'm happy to talk about them afterwards if people did want to talk about it. Thinking about, you know, when you train. So just very simply that, you know, if you are someone who plays football, example, or does training for, you know, club or county and so on and so forth, you know, do your training after iftar. You know, you should be looking at doing your, you know, 30% less, they say you should be doing of your maximum in terms of reps, keeping it to about an hour and a half. And have sort of progressive load that you increase during Ramadan. So we can talk about that later if people did want to talk about it. But some of these other things for you and me, the average person, you know, as I mentioned, just walking to the masjid if it's safe and you're able to do that, breathing exercises, light jogging, just stretches, all these things, they will help your body process the calories as well. So after you've eaten iftar, your body then starts, especially when you have a lot of sugar, your body then starts converting that excess sugar into fat. And what exercise does is actually initiates the body machinery that says, no, body, don't do that. Start burning it off, and it slowly burns it off rather than assembling the machinery that starts burning off the fat. So we talked about moving healthily. Now, briefly, we'll just talk about your health conditions. Now, this is an area where, you know, there's a lot that you can do. I could talk for another half day about these things. And as I mentioned, I've written 15 papers about these things. There are extensive guidelines available for clinicians, for GPs, for pharmacists, for nurses who look after you if you have got a health condition, as to how to talk to you and talk about changes to your medicines and the types of medicines that you take and when you take them, and other things, if you have got a long-term health condition. So if you need that conversation and you feel like your doctors or your health team don't know about it, just signpost them to the BIMA website or the BIMA material. They can read up about that, and you know, they can educate themselves and hopefully be able to inform you as to how to do that. So there isn't sort of a blanket rule about, you know, whether you should or shouldn't fast. At the end of the day, the decision to fast is mine and yours alone. And you need to take advice from the medical professional as well as from an alim or from a scholar if you feel like you have a particular condition, because the choice is yours as to whether or not you fast or not if you have got a health condition. But it's important that this isn't taken as a binary choice. So it's not like you're not fasting the whole of Ramadan, or it's not like you're ever fasting ever more in your life. People with actually quite serious conditions like cancer and so on, if they want to, if they're motivated to, and if they're able to, they can fast one day in Ramadan, just the one day, or they may fast alternate days, or they may fast 2 days in a row, and then that tires them out and they're not able to fast for the rest of the week. So it's not a binary decision. It's not like you can never fast in Ramadan or you can't fast that. But these sorts of conversations really need to be had with your clinician and also with a scholar. And of course, people will know you can pay the fidya, for example, or you can do qada later, especially in the UK when the winter months come. The fasts are very short, you know, like 8-9 hours, I think, which is just the same as skipping breakfast. So for people who have certain medicines, for example, that you have to take every 12 hours, that might be a time where you can do your fast. So, but some general things to think about, not specifically about, you know, diabetes or certain illnesses, is it can be difficult for us to know what is a trivial illness, just like a sniffle and so on, and what is an acute and sudden illness. And for these things, you really just have to play it by ear. It's very difficult to give a sort of blanket diagnosis, a blanket sort of rule for that. It's important people are reassured that if you're fit and healthy, there is no evidence that shows that Ramadan fasting actually increases your likelihood to become ill. If anything, there's studies that show that Ramadan or fasting overall improves your immune system. And your body assembles the machinery that improves your immune profile. And studies have also looked at antibiotic prescribing in the UK and abroad, and they show that no more antibiotics are prescribed in Ramadan than outside of Ramadan. But again, this is an individualized choice that you need to make as to whether or not you should or shouldn't break your fast. One of the things that I would say, though, is that if you do have COVID-like symptoms, we're still not sure around the effects of long COVID and as to whether or not you are more likely to get long COVID if you overexert yourself, if you have got COVID. There is some evidence that shows that people going back to work or not taking time off when they have got COVID may be more likely to get COVID. I have no idea what the long-term data is on those things, but these are the things where, there is a bit of uncertainty, and we just have to sort of live with that ambiguity until the data becomes more clear. Things that are very common, though, and we all know this, we've all experienced it, are heartburn and reflux, that sort of belching sensation that you get. Easy way to overcome that. Don't eat too quickly. Don't eat so much fried, fatty, spicy food, and slow down. But if you do find it's a problem and you don't take medicines for it, speak to your pharmacist. They can talk about things that you can get over the counter. Headaches, we talked in great detail about caffeine and sugar and so on. But other things that can cause headaches, of course, is sleep deprivation as well. So again, it goes back to the need to have good sleep hygiene. What can also cause headaches are hay fever as well. So just jumping around a bit, this graph, hope you can see it clearly on there, shows when the most common pollens come out. And as Ramadan will sort of go over the grass or birch pollen, I think it is, season, that's the most common type of hay fever, or the most common type of pollen, that triggers most people's hay fever. So the advice is for, if you do have hay fever, to start taking your nasal steroid spray, if you take that, and your antihistamines 2 weeks before the onset of those symptoms. So that what you don't really want to do is that, it suddenly catches you unaware on day 5 of Ramadan and your nose is streaming, your head is bunged up, and you're like, feeling miserable because of hay fever. Try and get on top of it, inshallah, ahead of time so that it doesn't become a problem. Things like constipation, again, is due to the fact that we're not drinking so much, moving so much, and also the types of food that we're eating may not be the best. So a high fiber diet is really good for constipation. Moving again, and we talked about hydration, are things that can help overcome that. And people who do get kidney stones can be more likely to get them in Ramadan, but overcome that by drinking plenty. Again, it's not binging on drink when the time of iftar comes or when it's the time of suhoor, small amounts all throughout the non-fasting hours. If you do have, and again, just to reiterate the point that I made earlier around any long-term conditions, if you do have things like recent diagnosis of or an uncontrolled bout of your diabetes, heart problems, kidney problems, and so on, you really must speak to your health professional about whether you should or shouldn't fast, because you can put yourself at harm. As I said earlier, there is to be a degree of hardship in Ramadan, but there shouldn't be harm from Ramadan. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not want to harm us. In fact, there's exemptions for people very clearly in the Quran for, if they shouldn't come to harm from fasting in Ramadan. So we shouldn't neglect our health thinking that, there's some barakah in fasting, or our iman is weak if we can't fast. There is ruqsa, there is, dispensation for us. And if you're not sure, do speak to, as personal knowledge, if you are unsure about this. I have never spoken to a scholar who has said that if your doctor says no, you should still fast. Every alim that I've spoken to says the doctors know your body. If the doctor advises you not to, the alim in most cases, in every case that I've come across, has also advised the same. The key thing, as I mentioned earlier, is about the fiqh in terms of what do. You don't just not fast all of Ramadan. And this is where it's important that you engage with people who understand Ramadan, who don't just sort of dismiss your desire to fast, especially if you have got a relatively stable chronic condition. There are very easy adaptations that you can do that are safe, that can enable you to fast Ramadan. And this is where I think there is significant room for debate. But if you are ill, if you have got serious conditions that are uncontrolled, you really, really, really must speak to someone about that. And again, just reiterating this point about, it's your decision at the end of the day. You take the Islamic opinion, you take the medical opinion, and you look at your circumstances. So, again, if you have things like caring duties, if you have things like, your work, for example, many ulama, during the COVID pandemic, when doctors and nurses had to wear heavy PPE, they said that it's permissible for doctors and nurses and those people wearing PPE not to fast if it's going to hamper their performance. And this is a very individualized choice. It's very specific to certain contexts, but it just reiterates the fact that it's an individualized choice. You have to do your bit in that. You can't just expect that you're going to pick up something off the shelf and it's going to be applicable to you. So coming up to the end now, so we've covered quite a few things about why it's important to have a healthy Ramadan. We talked about why it's important to be prepared to succeed. We talked about how we need to think healthy, eat healthy, move healthy, and we talked about our chronic conditions as well. And again, to reiterate, the purpose of Ramadan is to gain taqwa and to gain and to use this month to get closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Do not forget that in all of the stuff that we've discussed, any health benefit is secondary, but as we've seen, there are so many health benefits to be gained from fasting in Ramadan. Jazakumullah khair. I know I've spoken at length, and I really appreciate your time for listening. And I'll stop there and hand back to Dr. Adnan if you had any questions from yourself or from the audience.
Jazakallah, Dr. Waqar. That was, mashallah, very detailed and comprehensive a presentation that you managed to fit into, I think, about 40 minutes or so. So Jazakallah for that. There's a question on the comment section, and I've been jotting down some questions as well that I thought might be helpful in the last 10 minutes or so just to cover.
So, Dr. Adnan, I think you're on mute, sorry.
Oops. Are you able to hear me?
Yep, we can hear you, Dr. Adnan.
Yep, Dr. Salman, can you hear me?
We can hear you, Dr. Salman, but I don't think he can hear us.
1 second, sorry. I think my headphone just cut off, excuse me. Okay, can you hear me?
Yeah, are we good now?
My headphone just cut off because I was talking for so long. It just thought.
No problem. the joys and the challenges of live broadcasting is not a problem. I was just saying, thank you very much, Jazakallah. Thank you very much for presentation and being so comprehensive. I just thought there's one question on the comments, and I've just been jotting down some questions and some comments as well that I thought we could just quickly go through in the last 5 minutes or so. So the question we've got on the comment section is, can somebody have a vaccine during Ramadan, presumably whilst they're fasting?
So the vast majority of ulama are of the opinion that it doesn't break the fast.
Yeah. And I think in particular that was covered in detail, wasn't it, during the COVID pandemic? I remember there was a lot of opinions came out, and actually the consensus there is that the vaccine does not cover, unless it's for nutrition, which would be a slightly different thing. So again, it comes down to getting that individual advice from either your particularly a Muslim doctor or your local scholar. Inshallah, they should be able to help that. Got some other questions, mashallah, coming through. What is recommended for breastfeeding mothers?
Yes, it's a really difficult one, and every year we ask this question. So from a fiqh point of view, and Dr. Adnan, you can weigh in this as well, is that women who are pregnant, I'll do pregnancy as well at the same time. Women who are pregnant, they may not fast if they fear harm for themselves or for their child. Now, what does that mean? And I think this is where the ambiguity is. And is this harm real, perceived, actual, possible, and this is, where we have this huge gray area. And also for mums as well, they end up getting into this situation where they have too many fasts to make up. And, especially if you're having kids back to back, they can feel like, they're never able to fast for a big portion of their life. So if you look at the evidence, so at the end of the day, it's individualized, right? So there isn't really a blanket answer. For someone who's fit and healthy, if you're a pregnant mother and you've got a heart condition, or you've got diabetes and so on, that's a very different conversation. And we will err on the side of caution for both you and your baby, and in most cases advise you not to fast. But if you're an otherwise fit and healthy woman who has been breastfeeding your child, or you're pregnant, so from a pregnancy point of view, there are some data, and the thing with Ramadan research is that it's of not the best quality, because there isn't the sort of money in it that you have for other things like heart disease and diabetes. But the data that we have is inconclusive. Some studies suggest that women fasting during Ramadan have children that are of a lower birth weight, and some studies suggest that there is no difference. Some studies, in fact, a very recent study is asked to review, and it has lots of issues with it, suggest that if a mother adopts a particular diet, that doesn't actually affect the birth weight of a child. We don't know if this is due to things like if the mom has nausea and vomiting in pregnancy, for example. There's so many different things in there. Suffice it to say, there isn't a clear-cut answer. In the first trimester, so the first 3 months of pregnancy, there is some concern around what we call embryogenesis, which is when the baby is forming its vital organs, particularly its brain, particularly its neural sort of function. And there is some thought that if you are deprived as the mum of nutrition and hydration, that can affect neural embryogenesis. Again, there isn't long-term data. We've been fasting as an ummah for over 1,400 years, and there isn't sort of anything like that to suggest that people shouldn't be fasting. I haven't got a clear-cut answer for the pregnant ladies, other than to let them to say that you will probably be advised not to fast if you're in the first trimester. It's your choice if you do, and if you do fast, then you should take extra precautions in terms of your hydration, take extra precaution in terms of what you're eating. Take the dispensation that's offered to you and break your fast if you do feel unwell at any point, especially if you have any nausea or vomiting in pregnancy. And for breastfeeding mothers, again, try fasting before Ramadan. If you breastfed before and you didn't have a problem, then you're going to be a much better judge of whether you can fast or not than me, if you're fit and healthy. But in these few days in Sha'ban, give it a go. See what it's like. If you get to sort of 4 hours into it and you think, oh my God, I'm having terrible headaches, I'm not producing any milk, my child is suffering. Again, it depends how old your child is. If your child could be or is completely reliant on you for a feed, it is a very difficult question to answer. I hope that gives the sisters a little bit more guidance, but from a medical point of view, there is ambiguity.
Absolutely. I think that the important point is that and it applies to anybody who's unwell. If you're acutely unwell in particular, and if you are pregnant and you're acutely unwell, there's the risks of dehydration. If you're getting flu when you're pregnant, etc., then you're generally at higher risk anyway of illness and complications. Therefore, fasting in those states probably would not be recommended. So again, I think we're going to caveat our answers with the fact that you need to seek individualized medical opinion, and also Islamic opinion. And also, as you've quite rightly pointed out, it is your own experience as well. What is your experience of it, and how do you feel about it? And trying it out now, I think, is the best thing to do, isn't it? Absolutely.
And at the end of the day, I have an amana to the community in terms of being a Muslim doctor and doing this work to give you that evidence. But and I hope that I'm living up to it. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, will ask me, what did I do the right things? And I hope I did. But at the end of the day, your decision to fast is between you and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's a good deed that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala keeps to himself, right? Fasting is for him, subhanahu wa ta'ala, isn't it? So if you in your own mind feel that you have done all your due diligence, you've spoken to a health professional, your midwife, your doctor, whoever, you've spoken to a scholar, and you feel like I can't fast, and you've been advised not to fast, then that decision, has been made easy for you.
Absolutely. So some common questions we tend to get every year. So for instance, so a diabetic, should they be checking their blood sugar whilst they're fasting? And does checking your blood sugar invalidate you?
Doesn't. I mean, it's like the capillary. It doesn't. It doesn't. I mean, all the ulama say it doesn't invalidate your fast. As to whether you should be checking your blood sugar, that will depend on your type of diabetes. So, type 1 diabetics nowadays have the sort of, most of them should have the continuous glucose monitoring, but if they don't, they're using the regular monitoring. They'll be very familiar with that and should be doing that much more frequently if they are able to fast. Increasingly, type 1 diabetics are being, have the technology now to do what they couldn't do before, which is to do something like fasting. Type 2 diabetics, again, it's an individualized thing depending on the type of diabetes that type of medication, that you're taking. So if you are taking insulin, you really, really, really shouldn't be doing this blind. You really need to be speaking to someone. You really need to be checking your blood sugars and being advised how to do that, depending on what type of, what your dose of your insulin is, what type of insulin you've got, what type of diet you have as well, what your intentions are for Ramadan. Are you traveling? Do you have there's so many different things to that. But to answer your question, no, blood testing does not invalidate your fast in terms of the blood sugar, and you should test if you're advised to. And if you're not sure, and this is the key thing, if you're not sure, please do ask.
Absolutely. Getting in touch with your GP or even your diabetes nurse. As a type 2 diabetic, you may have a diabetes nurse at your practice or even the community nurses. So alhamdulillah, we've done a lot of work over the past few years on this, and there's a lot of awareness around Ramadan. They'll be prepared, and they're probably expecting you to come and ask these questions, to be honest with you. I think we've reached that, we have reached that kind of stage. What about things like using your blue inhaler if you're an asthmatic?
It depends. So if it depends, to begin with, are you having an acute exacerbation of asthma, in which case you're acutely ill, and that's a completely different question. If you're acutely unwell, you really shouldn't be fasting. You're putting your health at risk. Assuming you're not acutely unwell and you're generally in good health and you've got an inhaler that you take twice a day. If certain madhahib, particularly the Hanafi madhab, a predominant opinion in the madhab is that inhalation of an inhaler, that will invalidate your fast. However, the other madhab, the Shafi Maliki madhab, they have a more lenient opinion and they say that it doesn't. So this again is a conversation that you need to have with your religious authority of choice as to whether or not that is the case. But even if you are of the opinion that it does, there are potentially medication changes that we can make so that you're not taking the inhaler twice a day, especially now, as I said, you're doing a 14 to 16 hour fast. You can't squeeze in 2 12-hour doses if you have to have it 12 hours apart. So certain drugs, for example, blood thinning drugs, have to be given, in a regular interval, otherwise you risk overdosing and bleeding. But with the inhalers, you can potentially get a longer acting dose that you take once a day, or you can get different preparations. And it, again, just reiterates the point that conversation with your asthma nurse or with your doctors, or if you see them in the hospital, that really needs to happen as soon as possible so that you don't stop taking it. And the other question that a lot of people ask is about the glaucoma, the eye drops, over you're taking it for glaucoma or for other purposes. The vast majority of ulama say that even if you take the drop and there's too much and it goes down the back of your throat, they say that won't invalidate your fast. But even if you're unsure, you can do what's called punctal occlusion, which is to just pinch the bottom of your eyelid here as you put the drop in and blink, and that way it blocks the tear duct so you don't find it going in the back of your throat. And even if that feels a bit uncomfortable for you, just take it in between sahur and iftar, between iftar and sahur, excuse me. Because most drops are taken twice a day or once a day, and there's enough time there for you to do that. So it just brings home the point that if you have got medication, don't stop taking it. Ramadan isn't an excuse for you to not take it. Talk to your health professionals around changes that can be made. If changes can't be made, then you need to speak to your scholars around what to do in your situation.
Absolutely. And I think the key here, the common theme, is preparation. So it's not only preparing your body for Ramadan, preparing yourself spiritually for Ramadan, using Rajab, using Shaban. It's actually, getting to your doctor now. So you've still got a week, I think, or maybe 8 days. So you can still, I say, inshallah, get an appointment with your doctor or with somebody who may be able to give you some advice based on your particular medication or your health condition, because there's still time to do something about it. And I suppose just one reminder from me, especially for diabetics and asthmatics, because and in fact anybody else with a long-term condition, is make sure you've got your medication sorted out as well. So you don't want to be running out of medication and then cutting back either on your inhaler because you're trying to space it out and then becoming unwell, whereas you could have done something now to have made sure you've got enough of your medication. As a diabetic, you want to make sure if you are having to check your blood sugars, you've got enough of your strips, etc., so that you're not getting into Ramadan, then running out and then falling into problems. So that's probably just a quick tip there, is just making sure you get your medication sorted out beforehand as well.
And just to add, in terms of speaking to doctors, the more Muslims that engage with health services to say that I want to talk about my faith, I want to talk about Ramadan, the more likely they are to sort of invest in that and make sure that we have a situation where a pre-Ramadan consultation is the norm. So you don't have to sort of look for it in the same way that we have, systems in place for many other conditions and many other, things. So we really need to sort of, engage with the system and write to, so people have got links with MPs or councillors or those sorts of things, to sort of write it and say that Ramadan is important for me and my health. I wish the NHS and my practice could do more here, and that kind of gives us evidence as a whole, as a collective, to then say that look, let's do more to look after Muslims, and all the stuff that I mentioned around helping people to quit smoking, weight loss and all these other things. There's so many benefits. People have got, if they're low in mood and so on, if we can do things around Ramadan as a health system to make people feel more, improve their resilience and make them feel more part of the barakah that Ramadan brings, there's so much more that we can do. So that's just another thing. It's another reason, I guess, for you to perhaps engage with the GP, so that GPs and the system are actually knocking on the doors to say that, listen, we have all these Muslims that want to fast safely in Ramadan. Can we please do something more about it?
Absolutely. I think definitely I've noticed over the past 10, 15 years that the awareness is increasing, but like you say, there's a lot more work to be done. So presentations and the work that BIMA's doing, the guidelines you're putting together are really well appreciated as well. So Jazakallah, thank you for that. Any parting words from you before we come to an end today?
No, it's just, I think we've reiterated them much, and just for one more, just to do it once more, it's a marathon and it's not a sprint. If you fail to plan, you plan to fail. And Ramadan, you will experience some hardship, but you should not experience harm. And any plans that you make need to be individualized to you and your condition and your context. And please seek clinical and scholarly advice if you're unsure.
Absolutely. Jazakallah. Thank you very much to you, Dr. Waqar, and Karima Foundation for allowing us to come and discuss this topic, and just wishing everybody a blessed and healthy Ramadan, inshallah. And thank you very much.
Jazakallah. Ramadan Mubarak. Assalamu alaikum.